Net worth doesn't buy stuff. Not really. It buys something much stranger and much more valuable than stuff, and almost nobody describes it that way. $10,000 doesn't buy a vacation or a nicer car. It buys the ability to hear a $400 repair quote and feel annoyed instead of terrified. $100,000 doesn't buy status. It buys the ability to say no to a bad job, a bad relationship, or a bad deal without your bank account making that decision for you. $1,000,000 doesn't buy happiness. It buys something almost nobody talks about: the ability to choose how you spend your decades, not just your dollars. Every net worth number you'll ever hit buys something specific, not a thing, a capability. And once you understand what each number actually purchases, the whole idea of building wealth stops being abstract and starts being concrete, tier by tier, stage by stage. I'm Ellie, and I make videos about the numbers behind the decisions everyone assumes are obvious, but usually aren't. If you've ever looked at a net worth milestone and wondered what it actually changes, not just what it says on a screen, stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what you're actually working toward at every stage. Hit subscribe if that sounds useful. Let's get into it. What net worth actually buys you at every stage of life. That's the thesis of this entire video. So let's start at the very beginning, at zero, and work our way up, at net worth zero, or negative, which is where most people start their adult financial life. Once you account for student loans or early credit card debt, every single financial decision gets filtered through fear. This isn't a moral failing, it's just math. When you have nothing, every emergency is a crisis. Every job feels mandatory regardless of how it treats you, and every choice gets made from scarcity instead of clarity. Picture the version of you checking a bank account before payday, doing quiet math about whether a coffee is affordable this week. That's not about coffee. That's about what zero net worth actually costs you in daily mental bandwidth. The first real purchase net worth makes is at around $5,000 to $10,000. I made an entire video about this exact threshold, following someone who crossed it after 25 months of saving $200 a month. What that money actually bought her wasn't a thing. It was the ability to have her car's alternator fail and feel annoyed instead of panicked. $10,000 buys you out of the emergency economy. Not out of emergencies, those still happen, but out of the emotional and practical devastation that used to come with them. Consider what this actually looks like day to day. A dental bill that used to mean choosing between paying it and paying rent now means a mildly annoying withdrawal from an account you built for exactly this purpose. A friend's destination wedding that used to mean months of anxious saving now means a line item you can absorb. The dollar amount of these expenses hasn't changed. Your relationship to them has. The next tier, and this is where things get more interesting, is around $50,000. This is the point where your portfolio's own growth starts contributing close to as much as your monthly contributions do, which I covered in detail in another video comparing two investors with an identical monthly contribution and a 5-year age gap between them. But what $50,000 actually buys, beyond the compounding mechanics, is what's sometimes called walking away money. Not because you'll actually quit your job. Most people never do. It's the leverage that exists the moment you could. $50,000 buys you the ability to ask for a raise without flinching, because the worst-case outcome, hearing no, doesn't threaten your ability to pay rent next month. Here's what this actually looks like in a real conversation. Someone with $300 in savings rehearses a raise request for weeks, softens every sentence, and backs down the moment their manager pushes back, because the job, however imperfect, is the only thing standing between them and disaster. Someone with $50,000 in savings walks into the same conversation, states their case plainly, and if the answer is no, starts quietly updating their resume that same week, without panic, without desperation. The words they say might be nearly identical. The leverage behind those words is not. At $100,000, something shifts again, and this is a purchase most people never name directly. $100,000 buys you the ability to say no. No to a job that pays well but is slowly destroying you. No to a family member who wants to borrow money you can't actually spare without real consequences. No to a relationship that's financially entangled in ways that would be expensive and complicated to exit. Below $100,000, saying no to these things is theoretically possible, but practically terrifying. Above it, saying no becomes something you can actually do without your voice shaking. Here's a specific way to think about this. Someone with $8,000 in savings who hates their job is trapped in a very real sense, even if they intellectually know they could quit. Someone with $100,000 who hates the same job has options that feel real instead of theoretical. Same job, same misery, completely different capacity to act on it. That gap between knowing you could leave and actually being able to leave without your life falling apart, that's what $100,000 buys. Think about what this means for relationships specifically, since money and relationships are so tightly intertwined that most financial content avoids the topic entirely. Someone with meaningful savings who's in a financially lopsided relationship has the practical ability to leave if the relationship becomes unhealthy. Someone with nothing saved, regardless of how badly they want to leave, is making that decision with a financial gun to their head. This isn't a comfortable thing to say out loud, but it's true. And it's precisely the kind of purchase net worth makes that nobody puts on a milestone infographic. Now, before we go further up the ladder, let's talk about what people consistently get wrong at every single one of these early tiers, because the mistake is remarkably similar at each level, just wearing a different costume. At the $0 to $10,000 range, the mistake is believing the number itself is the goal. So the moment it's reached, people either spend it on something that felt like a reward, or they stop contributing entirely because the immediate crisis avoidance need feels satisfied. At the $50,000 range, the mistake is assuming the leverage is permanent once it exists, when in reality, that leverage depends on the money staying largely intact, not being redirected into a car upgrade or a lifestyle expansion the moment it starts to feel substantial. At the $100,000 range, the most common mistake is never actually testing the leverage. People reach this number, feel quietly reassured by its existence, and then continue tolerating the same bad job or unhealthy financial relationship anyway, because having the option and using the option turn out to be two completely different muscles, and only one of them gets exercised by simply saving money. Between $100,000 and $250,000, net worth starts buying something else entirely: geographic and career flexibility. This is the range where people can genuinely consider things that used to be off the table. Taking a lower-paying job that's more meaningful, moving to a different city for a relationship or an opportunity without the move itself being a financial catastrophe, going back to school, or taking an unpaid sabbatical to figure out what's actually next. None of these choices are free. All of them cost money and time. But at this net worth range, they become choices instead of fantasies. Picture two people at 40 years old, both mildly dissatisfied with their careers. One has $40,000 saved. The other has $180,000 saved. The first person spends years thinking about a career change and never makes one because every scenario they run ends with a gap in income they can't survive. The second person takes 6 months of reduced income to retrain for something they actually want to do, because their savings can absorb that gap without threatening anything essential. Same dissatisfaction, same ambition, wildly different ability to act on either. I want to be clear about something here, because this is where a lot of financial content gets it wrong. This range doesn't buy happiness, and it definitely doesn't buy the absence of stress. Someone with $200,000 can still be miserable, still fight with their partner about money, still lie awake worried about their kids' future. What this range buys isn't emotional immunity, it's optionality. It's the difference between being stuck somewhere you don't want to be and choosing to stay somewhere you don't love for reasons that actually make sense to you. At around $500,000, something quieter starts happening. This is roughly the point where, depending on your expenses and using a conservative withdrawal rate, your investments could theoretically cover a meaningful portion of a modest lifestyle. Not fully, not yet, but enough that people at this level start feeling less desperate about their primary income specifically. It's not financial independence. It's the beginning of financial independence being visible on the horizon instead of feeling like a fantasy reserved for other people. Someone at this level might not quit their job, but they'll notice something subtle. They stop dreading Mondays with quite the same intensity, because the job has quietly shifted from the only thing keeping me afloat to one input among several. And then there's $1 million, the number that gets the most attention, and honestly, the least accurate explanation of what it actually buys. $1 million doesn't buy a mansion. For most people reaching this milestone in their 40s or 50s, it doesn't even buy full retirement, not with a comfortable withdrawal rate against decades of remaining life expectancy. What $1 million actually buys is the ability to make decisions about your time on a completely different timescale. Not, can I afford this vacation, but how do I want to spend the next 20 years? That's an entirely different category of question, and almost nobody gets to ask it seriously below this threshold. Consider the difference between someone at $200,000 deciding whether they can afford a 2-week trip and someone at $1 million deciding whether they want to spend the next 3 years working reduced hours to be present for their children's remaining time at home. The first is a spending decision. The second is a decision about the actual shape of a life. Different scale of question entirely, made possible by a different scale of financial foundation. Beyond $1 million, somewhere in the $2 to $3 million range for most people, a final and less discussed purchase happens. The ability to absorb someone else's crisis without it becoming your own. A parent's medical emergency, a sibling's financial collapse, a child's expensive setback. These things happen to families at every income level. But below this threshold, they tend to become the family's crisis collectively, dragging down everyone's stability at once. Above it, one person can often absorb the shock without their own foundation cracking. This isn't discussed much because it sounds uncomfortably close to bragging, but it's a real and specific capability that this tier of net worth purchases, and pretending otherwise doesn't make the pattern less true. Here's the part that surprises people, and it's worth sitting with for a second. For years, a famous study claimed happiness plateaus around $75,000 a year in income. More recent research revisited that finding and discovered it wasn't quite right. For most people, well-being keeps rising with more money, with no clear ceiling. But for a smaller group of people who are already struggling with things money can't directly fix, grief, health problems, a difficult relationship, more income stops moving the needle past a certain point. The honest takeaway isn't that money stops mattering. It's that money reliably buys fewer specific fears. The fear of a $400 emergency, the fear of a bad boss you can't afford to leave, even when it can't buy its way out of every kind of pain. Let's talk about the mistake pattern at these higher tiers too, because it doesn't disappear just because the numbers get bigger. At the $100,000 to $250,000 range, the common mistake is a lifestyle creep, quietly eating the exact flexibility this tier was supposed to buy. A bigger apartment, a nicer car, subscriptions that multiply, until the money that should have created optionality is instead fully spoken for every single month. At the $500,000 to $1 million range, the mistake shifts to a strange kind of paralysis where people become so focused on optimizing the number itself, chasing slightly better returns, slightly lower fees, that they forget to actually use the flexibility the number already provides. They keep working the same demanding schedule, delaying the sabbatical or the career pivot indefinitely, always waiting for a slightly rounder number before permitting themselves to act. So here's what I actually want you to take from this. Stop asking what number you're chasing and start asking what specific fear or limitation you're trying to buy your way out of. If it's the fear of a broken car costing you your month, that's a $5,000 to $10,000 problem. If it's the inability to leave a job that's hurting you, that's closer to $50,000 to $100,000. If it's wanting to actually choose where you live and what work means to you, that's the $100,000 to $250,000 range. If it's wanting real authority over how your decades get spent, that's the $1 million conversation. And if it's wanting the ability to catch someone you love when they fall without it taking you down too, that's the conversation happening somewhere north of $2 million. None of these numbers are about being rich. They're about specific, nameable freedoms, purchased one financial milestone at a time. Net worth was never really about the number on the screen. It was always about what net worth actually buys you at every stage of life. And once you know which freedom you're actually working toward, the number stops being abstract and starts being a target you can actually understand. If this helped you see net worth differently, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos that run the numbers nobody else bothers to run.